So today I'm going to talk about breeding snakes, but I'm going to start off by showing you some amazing ball pythons. Of course, you can't produce ball pythons or other snakes without knowing how to breed them. And I'm just going to show you a few of our kind of prizes from last year, or at least things that I really love. So this happens to be a Sterling Lesser Orange Dream, which is a super pastel lesser cinnamon orange dream. So there's a whole bunch of genes going on, and the orange dream gene is really the key to making this animal so gorgeous and so clean. Not only does it clean things up, but it also brightens it up. So as it gets older, it's going to get more and more beautiful. And this thing is really starting to pop. So I really love that animal. And of course, I've always talked about Enchies and how I love them. Again, another animal that cleans things up and brightens it up a little bit. This happens to be a super Enchie pinstripe, and of course the pinstripe is an incomplete dominant animal along with the spider, and this would be the spider version of that same snake, the super Enchie spider. And of course, when you put those together, you can get spinners and all kinds of other really interesting stuff. Now, one of the animals that I've always said I love out of all the banana coral glow kind of complex would be the cinnamon. Now, it's a relatively easy animal in the sense that it's just two codominants bred together, so it's a double codominant. But I don't know, there's just something about cinnamon bananas that just blow me away. So if I'm going to show off some cool animals, I've got to show you these guys. So there it is, the cinnamon banana ball python. There's a gene called an extreme gene, which really reduces animals. This happens to be an extreme gene spider banana, but just take a look at how little amount of pattern that animal has. Completely just, patternless sides, really gorgeous animals. So this is the gene that I've been playing with the last year or two and been producing some pretty interesting animals. And then finally, before we get into the philosophy of breeding, I'm going to show you an animal that I just think is ridiculous, and that would of course be a pastel highway ball python. The highway ball python, of course, is a combination between the gravel ball python and the yellow belly ball python. It's an allelic trait, and then of course it has the pastel gene attached to it. So, in order to get these amazing mutations of ball pythons in paint jobs, you have to understand how to breed snakes. So today, I'm going to teach you how to breed pythons. All right, so I'm going to talk primarily about ball pythons, but the fact is that this philosophy really works on almost all pythons and boas, but there might be different times of the year that they happen. Now, what you have to understand is ball pythons come from Ghana, Togo, Benin, which is very close to the equator, so there's not a tremendous amount of temperature fluctuation, but there are a little bit in that region, not to mention there's certainly tremendous amounts of the difference between dry season and wet season. So really, when you talk about triggering animals, and that's something I really want to talk about, is triggers. What triggers animals to breed? You really have three things that are the primary triggers. Now, there can be other triggers as well in the more difficult snakes to breed, but when you're talking about ball pythons and other more simple animals, really three major triggers, and that would be temperature, humidity, and amount of food. So take, for instance, this nuclear woma lesser, which happens to be a fire lesser woma. I have to think, what is the best way to get this female to start producing follicles as well as be receptive to males? So it's about the philosophy and then giving the right conditions in order to have the best success. So really, your best success is to really combine all those triggers into one, both food intake, weather or temperature, as well as humidity. So let's get started with food. Now, we typically feed once a week here at BHB, and typically we're going to feed anywhere from 1 to 2 rats. Now, during the summertime, we typically go on what we call a maintenance diet, which is basically just 1 rat, and if they look a little thin, we may give them a second rat a week. So we're not feeding them as much as they want to eat. We're basically controlling that intake intake of food so that they're being maintained fed, which is healthy, but not overly fed. Right around November, December area, just about the time that we want to start ramping up for breeding, we start increasing that food by almost to the point where they'll feed as much as they possibly want. Maybe they'll feed 2 rats, 3 rats, even sometimes 4 rats in a week, and we feed them consecutively, one right after the other. So as soon as they eat one, we offer again and again and again. What we want to do is cycle that food to where they're getting a tremendous amount of energy. The saying I use is calories in, meat production out. So the more calories you can get into that female at the right time of the year, the more potential she is going to be to produce for you. So if you think about it just from a nature standpoint, a female snake is probably not going to produce eggs or live young if she thinks that there's sparsity of food, right? She wants to believe that there's going to be tremendous amount of food for her babies so that they thrive. That's how nature works. So we're trying to simulate that exact thing by increasing the food at the right time of the year. So basically we're saying, hey, there's an abundance of food. It's time to produce follicles and then produce eggs and then produce babies, because your babies are going to have a tremendous amount of food to eat and they're going to thrive and survive. All right, so now that you've been beefing up your females maybe a month or so before you're starting the temperature cycle, again, priming them to understand that it's about to be breeding season. Now there's a tremendous amount of variations and everybody can have success doing it their own way. I know breeders that don't cycle their temperatures whatsoever, and again, when it comes to some pythons that are close to the equator, they really don't cycle a lot of temperature there, and that's fine. But what happens when you don't cycle your temperatures is that breeding can become aseasonal, which means that you can almost breed 12 months of the year. If you want very specific acute breeding seasons like we do here in the winter months, you do need to cycle your temperature somewhat. So we keep our temperatures at 83 degrees ambient, and we'll keep our hot spot anywhere from 92 to 95 degrees. During the cool down period, when we're trying to actually cycle our animals, we'll only drop from 83 degrees during the day down to about 77 or 78 degrees at night. We'll also cycle our hot spot from 92 to 95, and we'll drop it down to 85 to 87 degrees at night. We do that for 8 hours a day. During the cool down season is when you're actually going to breed your males to your females. Now, one of the problems with the humidity that goes along with the temperature is the fact that during the winter months in the cold climates like we're in, is that the heat runs more often and dries the air out. And again, when you look at the way that they are in the wild over in West Africa, you actually have a monsoon season right at the time that they're starting to breed. So you want that humidity to come up. So you've got to kind of battle the fact that you have the furnaces on drying the air out and you're trying to get the humidity up. What we do is we have temperature controlled hoses. We basically just want to spray these animals down with a little bit of a mist just once a day. We don't want them to be wet, but we want them to have a little bit of a raised humidity. Again, that combination between temperature and humidity increase really triggers them into follicle growth. Now, there are some people, myself included, that believe even spraying can actually entice copulation. Seems that when weather fronts come in, so that's another thing that we really keep a close eye on, is when we have a low pressure, barometric pressure weather front coming through, whether it's a thunderstorm or in the wintertime a snowstorm, that's typically when males and females seem to copulate the absolute most. So again, we're simulating that a little bit with a little misting, almost like there's a rainfall. We're not dropping the barometric pressure that way, but we are simulating the rain, which does seem to entice them to breed. Now, the next thing that people ask all the time, and you know, I'll be honest with you, people have different philosophies on this, is how you actually go about the breeding, the cycle that you do. Now, some people will leave a male in one day and then give them 5 days off. Other people will breed 7 days a week. Some people will want to breed a female only once or twice throughout the whole season. Other people will breed that female 5, 6, 7 times. I'm going to tell you what has worked for us, and you can decide what works for you. For us, what we do is we cycle our males from Monday through Thursday, and then in every single day they go into a new cage with a female. If I witness a copulation, oftentimes I'll give that male 1 day off to kind of recuperate his sperm, then he's back into the next female, and I'll breed that female about every 30 days. So once I witness a copulation, I mark it down on my feed card. She will not have another male in with her for about 30 days. That gives her an opportunity to grow her follicles to the next size, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, and then I breed her again, and typically I want to get between 3 and 5 breedings per season. Now I give that male Thursday off to feed, and then I'll give him Friday and Saturday off to recuperate, and then back into the breeding cycle again. And so essentially a male is going to breed somewhere between 3 and 5 days per week, and the breeding season is going to start right around December area, and I'm going to breed all the way through April and sometimes into May. So basically we're now onto the follicle thing. Now follicles are basically just pre-eggs that are growing within a female snake, and that's how they eventually turn into an ovulation and then baby snakes in the future. And what we do is we use an ultrasound. Now obviously if you're just starting breeding snakes, you're not going to have an ultrasound, and I'm going to show you how to check a little bit, not as accurately in a minute about that. But so basically what we want to do in the beginning of the season is we just take an ultrasound, and the ovaries will start right about here, about 2/3 the way down the snake, and I just want to find that oviduct and then start to look for follicle growth. And right here I can see she's already got follicle growth. I just freeze them, I measure them up here. This particular girl has, let's see, she has 13 millimeters. Now a lot of people think that 13 millimeters or 12 millimeters, which some people would say 1.2 centimeters, which is the same thing obviously, is the way you start breeding snakes. I actually think that copulation can cause follicle growth, and a lot of people agree with me on this, so I'll breed a snake that even has 5 millimeters or a 1/2 centimeter follicles, because sometimes when I see actual copulation, they'll explode to 10 or 12 millimeters. Now once they've hit 12 to 13 millimeters, I want a male in with the snake as soon as possible. If I can find a breeding, like I told you before, I'm going to give her about a month to grow those follicles. Typically, follicles will grow anywhere from 3 to 5 millimeters per week. So within a 4-week period, I'm going to get about 10 to 12 millimeters of growth. So if this girl's at 12 to 13 millimeters, in a month from now, hopefully she's at 20 to 25 millimeters. In a perfect world, I want to breed a snake at 10 to 12, 20 to 22, 30 to 32, and about 35, and then she's going to ovulate at about 40 millimeters. So again, that means I'm going to get 3, maybe 4 breedings in before she's actually ovulating. All right, so if you don't have an ultrasound, the way you can do it is what they call palpating a female, and it's really quite simple. And to give you an idea, a 13 millimeter follicle is going to be about the size of a BB. So it is a little bit hard to feel, and they're going to be, again, about 2/3 the way down the body. Now what you want to do is let the snake crawl through your hand and pinch your finger and thumb together and just let it crawl through. Now you're not trying to push it through, and you're not sliding your hand. You're letting the snake crawl through your hand. And about 2/3 the way down, if you feel little BBs in there, B, that means it's about 12 to 13 millimeters. Now to give an idea, about 20 to 25 millimeters is going to feel a little bit like a marble, and then 30 millimeters, 35 is going to feel like a ping pong ball, and when they actually ovulate at 40 plus millimeters, it's going to be like a chicken egg. So as you palp those every few weeks, you can make little notes on your cages like, all right, this felt like a BB. Now a few weeks later, it felt like a marble. Now it felt like a ping pong ball, a chicken egg, and now you know that you're going to get an ovulation. So you don't need the fancy equipment, you can do it with your hand. But again, the important thing is to not squeeze and pull, just apply pressure and let it crawl through your hands and see if you can feel those follicles. One of the things I didn't mention is to make sure to go off of visual cues of the snakes itself. So I always tell people the most successful snake breeders are the people that read their animals extremely well. And we don't have any visuals for you right now because it's early in the season, but if you start to see what we call cool seeking, that's a good sign towards the end of the breeding season. So what happens is that females will literally start crawling to the cool side of the cage, they'll wrap their bowls, and that is exactly what you want to see. Now once they hit about 35 to 40 millimeters, which is about the size of a chicken egg, you want to warm those animals back up to the summer temperatures, and that's when you're going to see a pretty rapid ovulation, and that's basically the breeding season. One of the things I do want to touch on is other species. Now when it comes to boa constrictors and most species of pythons, they will breed the exact same cycle that I just mentioned with the ball pythons. But there are some exceptions. Take for instance rainbow boas, sand boas, and even tree boas. They typically will cool the exact same way, the same time of the year, everything just like we just did, but they don't breed until you start warming them up. So we don't put males in until the warm up, which is typically around March or even April, and then they'll breed and then they'll have babies mid to late summer. So if you follow these simple rules and want to give a crack at breeding snakes, I think you're going to be pretty successful. And as always, I'm here if you have any questions that you need. I'm happy to answer them for you. And I'm always Facebooking, tweeting, Instagramming, and Snapchatting my way through things. So make sure to follow me over at SnakeBytesTV. Until next week, you've been watching Snake Bites.